Okay, good morning. Let's go ahead and start. Let's go ahead and start. We've got Leanna here today. We're excited about that. Abby, how are you doing? Good to see you. We are starting a new year, new school year, and new church year. I guess school in Dallas starts tomorrow as well. I guess so. Kind of corresponds to that. Just a few announcements before we get started on this. And of course today, like I said, is Promotion Sunday. We have some administrative changes. You know, Kathy is going to retire in October. So, and then Michelle Steincypher is going to take her area. And so, one of the things that's changed, and you're going to see this coming around, is they're no longer putting the birthday lists in there. That's one of the things Michelle was doing, and so they're trying to cut back on some of that. It's going to cut back on paper too. But if you would put your this list that Carrie I think has it right now, but if you'll put your month and day, you don't have to put the year. Just put your month and day of the birthday on there. We'll have that, and we'll update that for you as well. We have 20 slots filled in 2 tables. Laura and I bought 2 tables, and we've got 20 slots filled, so that's a good thing for us on that. Now let me just tell you, I now have outrun my headlights. I don't know what happens next. I mean, nobody's given me any tickets. I got 2 pieces of paper that say I paid $600, but I don't know what, you know.
They'll give them to you, but at least in a week, a few weeks.
They're coming out, okay. Yeah. All right. And those, and if we have extras, I know Vicki is sitting with another group, maybe whatever, but no, that happens, that's okay. But the situation is we may have others in our group, and we'll try to see, and I don't know how they can arrange it, but I asked them, put the 2 tables close together, please, you know, I mean, so we're not one at one end of the room, one at the other, so they said they would do that. But, we'll see how that goes. We'll see how that goes. Okay. Let's see here. Other large things. Of course, the
dinner starts again this week.
Yes. Yes. So when the meal starts at noon and in the evening. T-shirts are again on sale. New art in the lobby.
It was just really worth the fee.
Yeah, it's very different.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
T-shirts.
Okay. CPR, a Saver CPR class is scheduled for Friday, August 30th. Cost is $25 to cover the disposable materials if you want to do that. You can do that. And then there's a picture that we need to get all autographed here today of our new residents here. So if you don't have a word of worship, actually we're out of them. You can have this one. But at any rate, that's a good group of folks. We're glad you guys are here. Let me give you a little bit of introduction here.
Quick question.
Yes.
When do we start again with Genesis?
In January.
Well, not till January.
January. We go through it. In fact, if you ever want to see the list, I'll send the list out again. In fact, I need to do it. We've got all the slots filled. Leanna and Lee are switching on one down somewhere. Jerry signs you guys up somewhere for down the road, and we don't know which. So I have a Leanna/Lee and a Lee/Leanna. I don't know which it is, but I'll send that back out. We don't have Sunday school, it turns out, on the Sunday between Christmas and New Year's. We have one service that day and kind of a brunch ahead of that for the whole church. And I had us down for a brunch in here. I thought that's what we would do, but it sounds like the whole church is going to do that. But then George Mason will wrap us up. He has 45 minutes to teach the Bible, you know, to kind of do wrap the whole thing. And as you saw from when he just walked in and started teaching the lesson, he can do it. So that can happen. There is a one flyer to pass around. They're still looking for volunteers for Friday Friends. And just an FYI, both Faye and Mark Larson are in our class because of Friday Friends. And so Mark attends that, and it gives Faye a break as well. Any other, yes?
I have a thank you note from Ryan and Mia that I'd like to read. It says, "Dear Foundations of Faith, thank you so very much for the gift cards. We are so overwhelmed by and grateful for your generosity. Baby girl will be all set and can't wait to meet you. Mom and Dad will be all set too, thanks to the Starbucks card. We appreciate all of your love and prayers, the Wilsons." And I'll pass this along.
Nice.
So
How fast?
we ended up with $220. So I got them one for Target, one for Amazon, and then the $20 I got a Starbucks gift card because
Good
I
for
figure
you.
they're gonna need coffee.
That would be appreciated. Yes.
Sure did. I
Okay.
thought, did we get $200 to Starbucks?
That's great. That's great. Anything else before we get started? I want to introduce Leanna to you just for a second here. Okay. If not, let me read. I'm going to read this. This is straight off the press.
All right.
Okay. Leanna Coyle-Carr began her Wilshire residency in August of 2019. Okay. She and her husband Aaron came to Wilshire in 2017 after Aaron earned her master's degree from Wake Forest School of Divinity in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, where she studied, this is again, you're going to get this sentence, the intersection of faith, femininity, and ecological well-being.
Good grief.
Okay, she and Aaron are pre-ministerial scholars, met as pre-ministerial scholars at religion at Samford University in Birmingham, Alabama. They like to do things together and hope one day to co-pastor a Baptist congregation. They've welcomed their first daughter, Hanley Caroline, in 2019, and Leanna looks forward to the overlap in conversation between motherhood and the pastoral life. And Leanna added one thing, she's really looking forward to teaching Foundations of Faith. Here's our first.
All right. Well, we get to talk about Galatians today. I am super excited about this. Galatians. Do we need to have a collective eye roll when it comes to Paul's letters? Oh my goodness. Sometimes it's cathartic. I do have a soft spot for Paul in my heart now these days. Before seminary, I was like, Paul, come on, brother. And after seminary, I'm like, okay, you had a big job. Okay, I can have a little bit of grace for you. Speaking of grace, why don't we ask the blessing on our time together? Oh, God, you feed us with food that we don't even know about. You nourish us. You nourish us. You give us what we need to live and grow. Help us to be open to what you set before us, oh God. Bless our time together. Give us eyes to see, ears to hear. In Jesus' name, amen. So Galatians. Anybody who just want to throw anything out there about Galatians first, right off the bat?
It's one of the first written books of the Bible,
Yes.
or of the New Testament.
Yes, it is among the first. Because Paul, this is one that we think that Paul really wrote. It's not someone using him as a pen name, but this was really him, the Apostle Paul, writing. And we love at the end of Galatians, this is the book where he says, see, chapter 6, verse 11, see what large letters I make when I'm writing in my own hand. He puts his mark on this book. Because I think one of the reasons why I like Galatians the most, has anybody done any Enneagram with Heather? Anybody? Okay. Well, I'm one of the feistier numbers on the Enneagram, and I feel what Paul is saying. He so loves the community. He so loves the Galatians so much. And he says, oh no, maybe even, oh bleepity bleep no. You will not return to the old ways. You will not again yield to the yoke of slavery, to the yoke of having to earn your place with God. No, my children. No. He's very feisty about it, but I think he has every right to be. Every right to be. Okay, so an overview of Galatians I think might be helpful. We've got a map in here, don't we? First, where do you think Galatia is? Who are we even talking about? There's this group of folks that are living in modern day Turkey, this kind of middle swing. Anatolia is what the old name used to be, but we call it Galatia now. We're not exactly sure which community. It could even been like a plethora, a wide swing of the community in this area. But the Galatians, most of those folks were probably Celtic peoples that migrated in. And so we know that they were pagans before, so not Jewish. And we know, of course, that Paul is a Jew. That is number one thing to keep in mind, I think, when it comes to anything that Paul has written, is that Paul is a Jew. He is a Jew. And it is a beautiful thing. And when he looks at Jesus, he sees the fulfillment of everything that he's ever hoped for. That he is Jewish. These folks have never been Jewish before. They're the Gentiles. And of course, Paul had his ministry to the Gentiles. That was his received mission from God, was that he would go to the people, unlike he would leave his own people and go to the Gentiles. Let's see. What do y'all know about Paul? That's the only thing about coming into the classes. I don't want to just repeat everything. But what do you think it meant for him as a Jew, maybe even, as he said, the chief among Jews, to receive this mission? What do you think had to happen in him to be able to go to these people that he wouldn't even eat with before Jesus?
A complete transformation. A complete transformation.
Complete.
Yeah,
So
it's
he
just that he
carried
wants
the same zeal with him,
Mm-hmm.
whether he was persecuting the Jews or he was,
Yes.
whatever it was, yeah.
Yeah. I think we should have a little profile of Paul. Yeah. Brother Paul. Zeal, exclamation point. And a total transformation, complete transformation. Okay. Do y'all read the book before you come?
Sort of, maybe.
Yeah, sort of.
Depends on the person.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, Galatians is a book that that's actually really, really important. Paul is saucy, and if it's allowed, we talk about it. He's a little lewd in certain places. He makes jokes about private parts because the book circumcision comes up. But it's because he is so incredibly zealous for the liberation of people. They can be liberated out of trying to work at getting at God, because for him, for Paul, because of the faithfulness of Jesus, that is done. There is nothing you have to do anymore to be with God.
It's like freedom.
Yes.
He's given us freedom. Oh, he talks about freedom.
God has accomplished everything that God wanted to do. God has brought in a new age. And that's why he is so, so zealous and feisty and a little lewd. He wants to get everybody's attention. And this is really important in its own time, because we've got Jews and Christians trying to, erase that. We've got Jews, ethnic Jews, who believe in Jesus, and now Gentiles, or just other ethnicities, who are now seeing this promise fulfilled in Jesus, and because of the Spirit, recognize that they're in, that they're included. They've been welcomed to God as well. And everybody's trying to figure out, how do we do this? How do we talk to each other? If I'm a Jew, do I stop being a Jew? But my mommy and my daddy, and their mommy and daddy, it's more than just a religious identity. And then the Gentiles are, I hate to just walk in on the last act here. Shouldn't I observe the Sabbath? Shouldn't I? Do I need to be circumcised? And in fact, so we see how this was an incredibly important book in its own day. And then later in church history, anybody want to guess when Galatians would have come out to the forefront later on in church history about grace and the law?
Oh, like in the Reformation.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it was very, very important for Martin Luther when he read Galatians, and he started to wonder about the different ways that the church at the time had put legislation on everyone. we can argue a little bit about if he used Galatians faithfully or not. But he got it somewhere, didn't he? All right. So we think Paul absolutely wrote this book, okay? All right, and to whom was it written? To the Galatians. And we think in that geographical area, I just want to tick through some background stuff for you real quick. Celtic peoples who migrated into Turkey, so pagan folks. Paul did missionary work in the region of Galatia. We know this from Acts 16 and so forth. Acts 16, Acts 18, he talks about doing mission work in Galatia, and started a small community of churches there. Being pagans, they would have been used to stages of initiation. There were other religious groups, even Gnosticism, which comes to play in other books that I'm sure y'all covered, had these stages of, well, you're a novice at this level, and we just keep you around for a little while. And then you do a couple of things. Usually you raise enough money, and maybe you get some type of mark put on your arm, or there's like, it wasn't odd to imagine having to cut off a part of your body to join a group, to do something. So, and Celtic Christians, have you ever read that book, How the Irish Saved Civilization? Anybody read that?
Yes.
Yeah, it's the Western Civilization. Actually it's a sweet little book, but my heritage is Irish. But to hear about the Celtic gods and how fearsome, people would whip themselves into a fury before they went into battle and all this in service to the god. So this was not a strange idea. Oh yeah, okay, so I've got to get circumcised. I can't eat these foods. I got it. Okay, I'm initiated into this group. That would have been normal and comfortable. But Paul has something else to say. Let's actually look at the text. Let's look at the text and walk through it. How about that? In the first chapter, you've got Paul. He gives a very quick hello, very quick salutation. He wants to get right down to the heart of it. Verse 6. Can somebody read that? Verse 6.
I am astonished that you are so quickly deserting the one who called you in the grace of Christ and are turning to a different gospel.
Ooh, I am astonished. I think, yeah, he would have had some energy behind that. I am shocked. Not that there is any other gospel, but there are some who are confusing you and want to pervert the gospel of Christ. But even if we or an angel from heaven should proclaim to you a gospel contrary to what we proclaim to you, let that one be accursed. Woo! As we have said before, so now I repeat, if anyone proclaims to you a gospel contrary to what you received, let that one be accursed. Paul is packing the heat here. He goes into, after that, talking about how you can really, really trust me. There is some, usually some question, well, are you an apostle or are you not an apostle, Paul? He is. And he has conferred with the other disciples. They have said, yes, you are sent by God to the Gentiles. That's the next part there. Paul is trying to say, I am not trying to fool you. And then he goes on to say, even he stakes his reputation. Well, how about this? What in the world do you think the gospel is that Paul gave to the Galatians? What's good news? Jesus. Yeah. Jesus. There is a powerful verse. Chapter 2, 15 through 21. I'll read this, okay? We ourselves are Jews by birth and not Gentile sinners. Yet we know that a person is justified or found righteous, not by the works of the law, but through faith in Jesus Christ, or by the faith of Jesus Christ. And we have come to believe in Christ Jesus so that we might be justified by faith, by the faith of Christ, and not by doing the works of the law, because no one can be justified by the works of the law. But if, in our effort to be justified in Christ, we ourselves have been found to be sinners, is Christ then a servant of sin? Certainly not. So many exclamation points. But if I build up again the very thing that I once tore down, then I demonstrate that I am a transgressor. For through the law I died to the law, so that I might live to God. I have been crucified with Christ, and it is no longer I who live, but it is Christ who lives in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. I do not nullify the grace of God, for if justification comes to the law, then Christ died for nothing. Basically, this is the heart of it. Paul is writing to a group of people where some folks have come in. At one point, the Galatians were living freely. They had experienced this radical inclusion by the Holy Spirit. They were in. They believed that they were loved by God. They were set free from having to work those circles of initiation. They didn't have to mutilate their bodies. They didn't have to do any of those things anymore. They were included to God. And then someone came in feeling a little nervous. Well, I mean, they're trying to figure out how to live together. There's probably, Jews there who are, we need you to follow the Sabbath. We need you to, this is what righteousness looks like. Y'all, what is righteousness? Right relation with God. In order to be in right relation with God, it looks like this. It looks like keeping the Sabbath. It looks like being circumcised. It looks like only eating certain foods. But Paul's argument is that, and he goes on throughout the book, we can get into the rest of his argument, is that righteousness from the very beginning is not something that humans accomplish by way of the law. Okay? Paul, the Jew of the Jews, is saying even in my place, even before Jesus, the law is not what set me free. The law is what I did in response to the faithfulness of God. In the next chapter, he starts talking about Abraham. Evidently, some of those folks, I'm sure well-meaning, let's not demonize anybody, but the folks who were trying to, say, okay, let's live by righteousness, I'm sure they were trying to do a good thing. But they were arguing that Abraham, something about Abraham, he was the first proselyte. That we had the law and everybody followed the law. This just is how it is, and we gotta do that too in order to have a good relationship with Jesus. Well, Paul goes back and starts to reinterpret Abraham for himself. It's hot in here, isn't it?
It is. Except for Robert Bell.
Chapter 3, verse 17 says, my point is this. The law, which came 430 years later after Abraham, does not annul a covenant previously ratified by God, so as to nullify the promise. Paul points to, well, Abraham didn't have the law. And Abraham was accounted righteous. Everybody thinks that. So he was even working with trying to meet people exactly where they were. Okay, well, you've heard that Abraham, or you've heard that it's righteousness comes by doing these things, having a right relationship with God. But even in our faith, even the way that we've done this for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, even the very beginning, Abraham, he was not righteous because he did things. He was righteous because God came to him and said, I want to have a relationship with you. I love that. I love that deep, deep, deep reach into, he's not trying to nullify or cancel out all of Jewish history up until this point. And it's important that we point out that Paul is also not trying to supersede Judaism. He's not trying to say, well, that doesn't matter anymore. He's actually showing that for him, the law was never about getting you close to God anyways. What gets us close to God is God's self coming to us. It is the faithfulness of God, the constant over and over coming close of God that sets us right, that sets us at peace. And the law was given, verse 19, why then the law? It was added because of transgressions. And he goes on to talk about how basically we were minors. You know, he gives the analogy of, minors, you give them rules. And you have a guardian for the minors. And then once they come of age, they don't need that anymore. That's how Paul thinks of the law now, in this place. And through Jesus, can we go back a little bit to this verse 16 of chapter 2? Yet we know that a person is justified. I've got a note in my Bible that says, or reckoned as righteous, a right relationship with God. Not by the works of the law, but through faith in Jesus Christ. I also have a note. There's a textual discrepancy that is very important to know about. And it's not necessarily something to argue about, but it's really important. We've got faith in Jesus and faith. Anybody want to guess?
You told us earlier, I didn't have to guess.
We thought you were so smart.
You listen
I
well.
listened.
I think that a faithful reading of Paul, to say faith in Jesus, almost puts the onus back on us. I gotta have faith in Jesus. I gotta do it in order to have righteousness, in order to have a good relationship with Jesus, a right relationship with God, excuse me. But if we read it this way, yet we know that a person is reckoned as righteous not by the works of the law, but through faith of Jesus Christ. The faith of Jesus Christ. Paul could be saying that, and this fits too with his argument about Abraham was righteous not because he did anything, but because God came to him and gave him a promise. And that promise is what made him righteous. It is righteous not being like, I'm a self-righteous person, but righteous as in connected to God. That is so hard to erase from my brain. This idea that righteousness means I'm right. That is hard to erase from my brain. Oh, that is not what this is after here. Righteousness meaning that what was broken once was in my way is now gone. And I can see what's been real this whole time, that God is right here. Loving us, wanting us, creating in us, with us, through us. Good life. Full life.
Leanna, I've got a question, and this goes back to the very first chapter.
Please, yeah.
I'm assuming Paul started these churches in Galatia that he's writing back to, and he's concerned
Yes.
that they're kind of have slipped back, they're starting to believe other things. Do you have any feel for how long that was between that time, do the scholars know anything about how long between was it 3 years, was it 6 months, was it?
That's a very good question. We think that this book was written somewhere about the 50s, 50 CE, and so, I mean, it could have been as little as 3 years, 3 months. It could be as long as 20 years. We don't know.
It seems to me that the way he starts the book off, hey, I wasn't appointed by humans, or, whatever, I was appointed by God. I mean, so you can't trump that card, with him or anything. So it's like he was trying to reestablish himself, I guess, or something with them that,
Yeah, let me get my math right. 30, yeah, 30. Well, not quite as long as 20 years. You do get the sense that he's like, quick, I'm not going to stop. I'm not going to go one more step further without writing to you. This is an immediate problem we have to address.
all right.
We don't know how long. We don't know how long it took for those questions to start coming up. Am I doing enough?
No.
We don't know.
Of course, then, because nothing was communicated as quickly as it is now. You have these questions rumbling in the community, and then how long does it actually take? Like, it could be that stuff really took hold by the time Paul got word of the fact that they had even started thinking that way, right? And so,
Exactly.
so which made it even more urgent for him to we need to fix this festering before it gets
It's festering. I think that is, it's so easy to me to believe what those folks were selling. I think it's also easy for me to understand how folks would want to relax into, okay, well, I do these things and that means I'm in. So I don't think it would have taken, just as an exercise of imagination, I don't think it would have taken very long. But Paul does say that they got it, that they experienced the freedom of the Spirit while they were together. And that might be a word of warning for us, that even no matter how radical an experience of God's inclusive love that we've had, it's very easy to fall back into the idea that we're not worthy, that for some reason God doesn't really like us, or want us, or love us. And not like in a, oh, shame, shame kind of way, that's not what I'm trying to say, but just there's an invitation in that for us to wonder, I wonder what's still got a hold of me, that I can it's easier for me to believe that I'm not worth it, rather than God has done absolutely everything to prove that I am worth it to God.
Don't you think it's kind of like somebody learning how to cook? We saw some show on TV the other day, and the whole deal was, do you cook it by the recipe, 1, 2, 3, 4, or do you just fly by the seat of your pants? And somebody said, well, you just put a tad, not a tad, but a pinch of whatever in there, and then, well, how much is a pinch? Well, for these people, or for anybody where this is brand new, it's a whole lot easier to think I'm doing it right if I can follow the steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If I have to just have faith, what is it and how do I measure it? I could see where they could easily want to follow
Absolutely.
somebody's numbers on here's how you do it.
Yeah, thank you for that illustration. I think you have captured the spirit of the Galatians. And I think if we're honest, maybe us too. I'll be honest, I'll testify that I still sometimes find myself wondering, am I really in? Does God really love me? Of course God does. This good news. And I love that Paul, in the very first chapter, kept saying, remember the good news that I gave you. This was not news of like, here's another harness to strap on your back. It was good news. There's nothing on your back anymore because of the faithfulness of Jesus. something that Jesus did, faithfulness unto death, faithfulness through the cross, through death and into resurrection, has heralded in, for Paul, has heralded in a new age, the Messianic age. That is what Paul is arguing. You're living in a new creation. He says, I have been crucified with Christ. Not I who live, but he who lives in me, through me. I am somehow in that crucifixion with Jesus, and that old self, that for whatever reason just couldn't believe God's promise, has been released, has been fulfilled in Jesus, and somehow I can trust that I'm free now. And we just continue in the faith, the process of faith, the journey of faith. We continue to learn that over and over again for the rest of our lives.
Leanne, can I just make a comment?
Yeah.
It might not be very popular, but I think when we have those doubts and we have had the assurance, that we're followers of Christ and we've dedicated our life to that, I think there's a scripture, that says, get thee behind me, Satan. And I think he's the one that puts those doubts in our head. And I think, and he just relieves you of that, releases that if you ask him to, because, it's the devil that really puts that in our heads.
It's definitely something that's not true.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Let's just get to know the book a little bit more, this letter just a little bit more, just to walk through. Y'all, as I get to know this class better, will y'all help shape me, okay? Help ask me questions, where do you want to go next and stuff, and we'll co-create what happens here together, okay? All right, but let's get to know the rest of the book real quick. We can do this in 5 minutes and then have some more discussion. All right, so chapter 3, law or faith. Woo! You foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you? It was before your eyes that Jesus Christ was publicly exhibited as crucified. The only thing I want to learn from you is this. Did you receive the Spirit by doing works of the law or by believing what you heard? Ooh. So he's just bringing this home, and he connects it to Abraham like we've already talked about. Someone had obviously made the argument that you got to do this by the law, that's how you get connected to God. And he says, nope, let's go back farther than the law. 400-something years before the law, Abraham was brought to God by God's own promise. That's what's happening here in us. God, the faithfulness of Jesus has changed everything. Has changed everything. And now we get to experience that promise without doing anything. What? This is absurd. This is good news. All right. Verse 10. For all who rely on the works of the law are under a curse. For it is written, cursed is everyone who does not observe and obey all the things written in the book of the law. He's making an argument here. Verse 13, you see, Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us, as it is written, cursed is everyone who hangs on a tree. In order that in Christ Jesus the blessing of Abraham might come to the Gentiles, to everybody, so that we might receive the promise of the Spirit through faith. Paul is bringing it home still, that this law was a guardian. It also is almost like a witness in the witness stand against humanity, and that Jesus, in Paul's view, took everything that the law could ever witness against humanity, and by living his life faithful unto death, faithful through death and into the resurrection, broke it. That witness is no longer true. A human, fully God, fully human, did live a fully connected life, fully faithful life unto God. That is a mystery. I will not even pretend I know how that works, except that it is the wondrous mystery of faith. something about what Jesus did in living that faithful life unto death, through death, and into resurrection, did it. We'll just take that as a given right now.
Leanna, I've got a question for you. See, I'm trying to, in my mind, put myself back in that place that I'm in Galatia and I'm being preached to on this. And if I'm a Jew, I can see how I would be relieved because now all those onerous laws and one of the other residents way back when he taught the minor prophets said the reason they put all those laws there is so that a person like me who probably couldn't read would at least know these are the things you don't do to have a rightful relationship with God. So the problem was it became so onerous that then the law became the ends to the means. Now if I'm a Greek or a non-Jew, maybe this is the only God I've ever heard of who's not vengeful and going to zap me if I do something wrong.
Yep.
And so that seems to be the great thing about this, the good news. And so those two, I don't know if those are right thinking or what, but it seems like those two might be the rationale, why someone might think this is such good news in that time.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, and can we imagine somehow even today how that would be good news?
Yeah, talking about today, the famous quote, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And that's exactly what this was.
Exactly. Woo! That gets me excited right there. I remember being in college, and someone said we were talking about the love of God or something. And one of my colleagues said, that's the story I really liked. It broke my heart, and it breaks my heart to this day. That is the story I really like to believe, but I don't think it's that easy. And to this day, it breaks my heart, but I think that's the heart of the Galatians, exactly. Everybody is also, I wrote this down while you were talking, everybody is also wrestling with how then shall we live? What does it mean to be a Christian, to follow Jesus? We had those laws that told us what to say when we got up in the morning, what to do, when our babies were born, all of these things. Now what? Now what? If we push on through, the purpose of the law was to help us learn, what we should do in those moments of life, like a guardian. But now we've almost graduated through that because of Jesus. Jesus has made us adult children in God's household. That's the analogy that Paul's using there. If you see verse 1 of chapter 4, my point is this: heirs, as long as they are minors, are no better than slaves, though they're the owners of the property. But they remain under guardians and trustees until the date set by the Father. So with us. While we were minors, we were enslaved to the elemental spirits of the world. But when the fullness of time had come, God sent His Son, born of a woman, born under the law, in order to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoption as children, all of us. I just love this part. And because you are children, God has sent the Spirit of His Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father, Daddy. So you are no longer a slave, but a child. And if a child, then also an heir through God. It's almost like Paul is saying, throw your shoulders back. You are a member of God's family. And that is irrevocable. It will never change. There's nothing you can do to make it more true. There's nothing you can do to make it untrue. Yes.
I say, because I had this happen to me a while back. I ended up applying about this a few years ago, and it still takes me to this day. Every time I always feeling like somebody's going to get me down and this and that, I have to remind myself that I'm one of God's children and I'm supposed to be happy.
It is grace, undeserved gift, but it's a gift. It is given, and God doesn't take that. Oh, All right? This next part, it's verse 8. Formerly, when you did not know God, you were enslaved to beings that by nature are not gods. Referring to the pagan state, to whatever essential stories that guided their lives. Now, however, that you have come to know God, or rather to be known by God. I think, can we just highlight that all in our Bibles? This is the main point. God has come to us, not the other way around. We don't do anything to get at God. God is already here. Come to us. God came to Abraham. God became incarnate, and Jesus Christ came to us, and it has brought in a new age where we don't have to play the game anymore. It's over. We are members of God's household, family, and that's what we've got to learn how to do, is how do we act like family? What does God's family look like? What does it mean? That's the question, and He's about to help us with it. Let's see. Let's keep going. I love this verse 19 in chapter 4. My little children, for whom I am again in the pain of childbirth. Bless his heart.
We've been waiting for that.
Sweet memories. I can testify.
Okay, yeah, right, gotta go for it, yeah.
I wish I were present with you now and could change my tone, for I am perplexed by you. About you. And then he's got this allegory of Hagar and Sarah, and I'm going to tell you I don't like it. It is an interpretation that he's using a hyperbole to get a point across. This is not the forever set in stone way of how we need to look at Sarah and Hagar, because he says that, well, look, this is why we act the way we do. Some of us are daughters and sons of Hagar, who was a slave, so we act like we're in slavery. Others of us are sons and daughters of Sarah, who was not a slave. She was a free woman, so we act free. And that's just how it is. But I don't even know why he puts that in there. It must have been very unique to what his opposers were arguing in the community, because I find it very problematic, to say the least, that, because Hagar, well, Hagar didn't choose to be a slave. She was enslaved. Yeah, I don't think we need to even go into that. But just know that that's there, and we can wrestle with it, and we can also have grace for Paul. All right? Chapter 5, verse 1, very famous verse. For freedom Christ has set us free. Stand firm, therefore, and do not submit again to a yoke of slavery. So eventually, even though he does use this hyperbolic allegory of Hagar and Sarah that is problematic, he does get to the point. The point is, now all of us are free. Whether Hagar or Sarah, whether slavery or we're all free, and this is where we stand, period. Okay? All right, now the nature of Christian freedom. Okay, if you want to know a baldy joke, chapter 5, verse 4. Are y'all going to tell you're going to tell Pastor George I told you this? You who want to be justified by the law have cut yourselves off from Christ. You have fallen away from grace. All right, he's talking about circumcision. For through the Spirit by faith we eagerly wait for the hope of righteousness. For in Christ Jesus neither circumcision nor uncircumcision counts for anything. The only thing that counts is faith working through love. He's making a joke to make a point, but cut yourselves off. Please just play with that in your mind a little bit. Well, even verse 12. I wish those who unsettle you would castrate themselves. Straight up. Just cut it off. He is so upset. I mean, and he has every right to be. Verse 13. For you were called to freedom, brothers and sisters. And this is where we get to the how then shall we live. Only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for self-indulgence. but through love become slaves to one another. For the whole law is summed up in a single commandment: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. If, however, you bite and devour one another, take care that you're not completely consumed by one another. Now, the works of the flesh, we need to be aware in Paul's argument, we are almost out of time, that he uses an argument of flesh versus spirit, which, if taken at face value, could go into dualism about the flesh is nasty and dirty and gross, and the spirit is the only thing that matters. We can see in Jesus, God become flesh, that is not the way of Jesus. To X out our literal bodies and only live for the spirit realm is not what Jesus is about. God became a part of creation in Jesus. But Paul is making an argument, and a very important argument here. He's trying to just almost like, I had this revelation this week. When he says, I have been crucified with Christ, it's not a punishment. I don't think Paul sees Jesus' death as a punishment on the cross. It's rather a fulfillment. Jesus was faithful unto death. Jesus didn't deserve that death. Humans did it. Humans did it. And Jesus was faithful never to blaspheme, never to hate, never to do any of those things through death. And so when we therefore are crucified with Christ, our bodies, this fatal flaw in humanity, that we want to one-up one another, that whatever it is that make that dog eat dog, survival of the fittest, is somehow, praise Jesus, undone in some way. It does not have to be our ruling factor, our prime directive. Anybody's Star Trek fan? It's not our prime directive anymore. Love is our prime directive, and we see that exemplified in Jesus. And so therefore, that's what he's talking about with this flesh spirit back and forth. I think what he's talking about is the flesh, what we once were before Jesus' faithfulness. That's done. That's the old way that our flesh behaved. We have a new way. Our flesh behaves differently now because it is guided by the Spirit. And how do we know if it's guided by the Spirit? Because there's fruit. The Spirit creates in us something new, something good. And it looks like, instead of fornication, impurity, licentiousness, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife, jealousy, anger, quarrels, dissensions, factions, envy, drunkenness, carousing, and things like those things. Instead of that, the fruit of the Spirit, what the Spirit creates and conjures and stirs and brings out of us, is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. And there's no law against such things. Woo, he tied it up, didn't he? He brought it home. And that is how we live. Yeah, we don't have the law anymore telling us that, okay, we get together on Saturday, on the Sabbath. We don't have those codes that show us how to live together in community. But what we do have is even better, and that is the Spirit of God Himself. Initiating in us, renewing our flesh to what it was always meant to be, free. And therefore not having to compete with one another, not having to be the one that survives because we're the fittest. But we are able to give and to serve and to love freely. And that is good news. And that is what Paul is reminding the Galatians of. Ooh, don't you bow down to that yoke again. You are free, sisters and brothers. Let's live that way. There's Galatians. All right?
Okay, but just before we go into our prayer request, I've asked Barbara to say something that she said at the deacons meeting the other night. She was on the pastoral search committee that brought George here. And a few things that she said, if you don't mind just repeating a few of those, Barbara, just give us kind of an insight into that search.
Well, in 1988, 12 people
were elected by the church at large to form a search committee. And we had a group of resumes to begin with that people from Wilshire and other places had given us. And George's name was in that first group. Over a whole year, we began to get more and more, dozens and dozens actually. But we got references for everybody, and always called the references and checked them out. But we tried not to be exclusive of anybody. So we kept all the resumes, checked all the references throughout the whole thing, so that if the Lord led us back to one or the other, we'd be open. As we checked references for other pastors, often a reference would say, I don't know if your church is looking at Alabama, but there's this guy named George Mason. Or, have you looked at George Mason? He might be a good fit for Wilshire. One group went to visit a pastor, hear him preach and interview him in another state. And when they got the rent car and started out, there was a sign that said George Mason and an arrow, and it said university. There was a George Mason University. They said, is God trying to tell us something? Yes. At any rate, we did continue. I can't tell you how much prayer went into this. As a group, individually, even fasting, it was really important to everybody on the search committee to know who God wanted for the church. And we felt like we found the answer.
That was
George actually mentioned in his sermon one time that he and Kim had been to visit this other church
In Birmingham.
And they talked about it and said finally they decided no, it wasn't a match for them. And so he called and told them no, that they weren't coming. And right after that, Wilshire called him.
That's right.
Within the hour.
Within the
Yeah.
hour.
Same day, yeah.
That was good. Thank you for
There's
that.
another,
Thank you for
Thank
that.
you.
God did.
That's right.
Let's do our prayer request then, so we can get to church. Joyce Adams, this is Ken's wife, that Joyce has been in our class as she recovers from the surgery, but she also found out on the 1st of August that she had a broken, scapula, shoulder blade. And she thinks it happened in physical therapy and just having a really tough time. Right now they're okay on food, but Ken said he would let us know if we need to bring a meal or whatever, so we'll do that. Bonnie and Robert, our Florida family, has many challenges, and now Olivia is being evaluated for developmental speech delay, and that's their daughter in Florida. Okay, so we'll pray for Olivia and the family there. Miles Hookman, a 3-year-old great-nephew of Carrie and Dave Donaldson, had extended grand mal seizure while on family vacation in Florida. Brain CT scan did not detect anything. A 24-hour EEG has been normal. Awaiting pediatric neurologist appointment about 3 weeks. Oh my goodness. Okay. Wow. Okay, so we'll pray for that. Any other prayer requests that we have? Yes, Linda.
I just have a praise for a wonderful, flawless trip to Alaska and back with all our family. And I guess flawless isn't quite right. We have one little hiccup where my younger sister from Oregon, who never, ever, ever has a good plane trip, almost didn't get there. But my niece calling behind the scenes, people she knows that will work at Delta Airlines to get her there. But we had a wonderful time, and just to see the look on my mother's face, with all her family there, and for me, a single person, being able to have a meal every single night with 10 other people at a round table was awesome. Beautiful.
Nice.
We had a great time, and watching my little 16-year-old nephew try foods like duck. It was great.
That's great.
Yeah,
That's
amazing
great.
thing.
Alaska's wonderful.
That's great. That's wonderful. Anything else? Let's pray then, and thank you again, Leanna. We appreciate your leadership today. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day and time that we can come and study your word and read the scripture together. And we We appreciate the lesson that Leanna has put together for us. Thank you.